H. Richardson, Henry Hobson Richardson, and we'll look at Trinity Church and the rise of modern architecture. Now, Richardson died young. He had kidney disease, and this is before dialysis. The overall theme architecturally that goes with this story of urbanism that we're discussing, and what we've been seeing so far in this course, and we're going to be seeing for the rest of the course, is the decline of historical revival architecture, the decline of an aesthetic as applied like a suit of clothes, and a decline of historical sources. So most of the architecture we've been seeing in this course, you build a serviceable structure and then you put the aesthetic on. It could be Roman if it's Beaux-Arts, it could be Romanesque as we're going to see here. In its place, we're going to see a rise of modern architecture in which the aesthetic comes from an honest expression of the spaces, the materials, and the structure, and instead of historical revival styles, we have abstraction. So let's see how we see that in Richardson. But first, recall we looked at Pancras Station a couple of weeks ago in Gothic revival style, and right here is this magnificent 1868, just a couple of years after the Civil War. They're building this giant wide span glass and iron shed, but they have to hide it. It can't count as architecture. So what we're seeing in this course is this is permitted to be architecture, Crystal Palace. They don't then stick columns on the front of it. Richardson, 1838 to 1886, and we associate him with the term Richardsonian Romanesque. Now, all of you people that have tablets, what might you do at this point? Zip over to Wikipedia, look up Richardsonian Romanesque, right? So we can tie these things together. Just a reminder, the Romanesque, we see that comes after early Christian and before Gothic. It's kind of a heavy style of the Christian churches, rounded arches, heavy, thick masonry. So here's Richardson's first important building, Trinity Church in Boston. And there's a whole story here. It plays a role in the urbanization of Boston, the kind of urbanization we've just been talking about. But we see it's very faithfully in a Romanesque style. If somebody said this is a church in France, you could believe it. And it's got our rounded Romanesque arches, etc. And actually there are churches in France that look just like this. And just for fun, where have you seen this? This is a staircase in the back of the church. We've got one at Pratt. It used to be on the part of the library. It's now over at the ARC building, this Romanesque stair. Now, here's the Crane Memorial Public Library by Richardson. We can see hints of Romanesque, the round arch, the rounded arch windows, but look what Richardson's doing. We've got a reading room, an entrance space, circulation, and the library space. The reading room, the entrance area, the circulation, the library space. Each of these elements are clearly articulated on the exterior of the building. In other words, the space inside is giving us the aesthetic as opposed to something applied. Now, it's still Romanesque, but this is very much a half circle. This is very much a square. This is very much a cylinder. We're starting to see abstract geometric forms replace the historical revival styles. Now, just another detour. This is a building, don't write it down, it's at Harvard. Austin Hall, another Richardsonian building. But look at these arches. Does that look familiar? Anybody know where you've seen that? Where is a nearby Richardsonian Romanesque building? We're in one! So Higgins Hall is a Richardsonian Romanesque building. The red brick, the round arches. Up here, these little repeated little arches. Here's our Richardsonian arches. So this becomes very influential architect. The police headquarters a couple blocks from here is in this style. Main Hall at Pratt is in this style. It's very dominant until the emergence of the Beaux-Arts. So here is the Marshall Field warehouse that Meredith just showed you. Now we get the problem with elevators and iron and then steel construction. We can make buildings taller. What are we going to do for an aesthetic? And so Richardson takes it's an urban building, so he takes the urban Renaissance palazzo with its rusticated base, its main floor, its cornice, and stretches it to get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7-story building. Just barely works. Here's Louis Sullivan. We'll hear more about him, but with his partner, Dagmar Adler, Sullivan and Adler, or Adler and Sullivan. He does the auditorium in Chicago, and he steals this solution from Richardson, but he's got 1, 2, 3, 4 floors in what should be one. And then he's got 2 here, and then 1 more here. So he admits that it doesn't work. You can't stretch it. And then he gets a really tall building. What's he going to do? And so the solution is the 3-part Sullivan skyscraper. So we have base, which is the ground and second floor. Then we have a repeated identical shaft, and then we have, we'll use the word, a cornice. And you can also describe it as 5 parts if you look in the book. But the trick is, if this were suddenly more floors, he'd be in trouble. You could double, triple the number of floors here and it'll still work. So he has solved the skyscraper. If you look at a building like the Seagram building by Nice, it's that solution. We're still using it. Okay, so we can look at it in more detail. If you look in Sullivan's autobiography, An Idea, and he describes the process, there are 5 parts to a Sullivan skyscraper. Number 1, the basement, machinery. So we're in the era now of big mechanical equipment. Number 2, ground floor, entrance and public spaces. For us, it would be banks, small stores, CVS. Number 3, the second floor, that's offices that are visited by the public, like a dentist's office. Number 4, repeated identical floors. And number 5, the cornice, which hides the machinery in the roof, such as elevator machinery. So those are the 5 parts of a Sullivan skyscraper. What does this remind us of? Base, shaft, cornice, the classical column. Okay, one more image, and that is right here is Frank Lloyd Wright's office. Frank Lloyd Wright was working for Louis Sullivan, and Sullivan is working in Richardson's aesthetic, Richardsonian Romanesque, and which grows out of the Romanesque. So we're tying all of our history together here. Frank Lloyd Wright objected to he was the project architect on this building, but he objected to this aesthetic. We notice that, here it is, this is what we've been looking at. We come around the corner. This is the part nobody sees, so he just makes it plain brick. In other words, Sullivan has built a serviceable building, and then he's applied the aesthetic like a coat. And Wright says the aesthetic should come from the spaces, the structure, and the materials. It should grow from the inside out, from the outside in as well. There's a dialogue. So here in Wright's, just 40-some years later, well, this is a 1929 design by Frank Lloyd Wright. He finally builds it in 1952, the Price Tower. And so here we see the aesthetic coming from the structure and mechanical of the building and how it's handling the sun. So we're seeing again a decline of historical architecture, and the aesthetic is applied like a suit of clothes from historical sources, and a rise of modern architecture in which the aesthetic comes from, an honest expression of the spaces, materials, and structure, and the forms are abstract rather than historical. And Richardson, besides just being a great designer and just these bold, strong forms, is a key figure in the pioneers of modern architecture, because of his key role in this transition.